Venom. Rise of Venom. Or Dawn of Venom. Venom v Riot. Venom v Audience. It's here. It's finally here. Everyone's favourite Spider-Man costume with monster teeth and jacked muscles, finally has its own movie. And so how did it pan out? Was it great? Was it garbage? Was it just the thing we needed to have everyone stop bitching about Spider-Man 3 because they didn't get the character right? Or was it worse than Spider-Man 3? Well, sort of, kind of, maybe, but not exactly really. The film is getting slaughtered by critics. Some fans hate it, some fans love it. But let's start getting into this. Now, I loved Venom, but I hated the way this movie was made. I'll be covering how it fails as a movie a bit more in depth and just saying, derp, Venom's as bad as Catwoman. To which I say, who the fuck remembers Catwoman? No. This is as bad as a Sony movie. This is as bad as an Amy Pascal movie. This is as bad as an Avi Arad movie. Cause remember when he pulled that shit last time? So Venom stars Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock and Venom. And that's where my crediting stops. Otherwise it continues with Riz Ahmed as bad business guy and Michelle Williams as love interest. And no one else. Tom Hardy carries this whole film on his shoulders. The main thing that kept my interest in this film from the get-go was his casting. Tom Hardy has a great track record of not picking garbage movies. He always picks movies that he can bring something new to. And this movie is no exception. That being said, Sony. And also Sony with the Marvel property. And also Sony with the Marvel property not under the watch of Kevin Feige. And so this is the verdict before it even starts. Tom Hardy will give a brilliant performance as both Eddie Brock and Venom playing off of each other. And Sony is going to fucking butcher the film in editing and then panic at the last minute and show every fucking thing in the trailers. Every single scene in this movie is in the trailers. No new scene will start that you haven't seen an image of in the trailers. The only new thing is Riot speaks sometimes. Alrighty, let's talk about the first third of this movie. The setup, also known as Act 1. It's obvious at this point, but a movie like this, the first act will be leading up to the two characters meeting and setting up the events and conflicts that they'll both have to deal with later on in the film. The first third of this movie is so flat and by the books. It's like they had the characteristics in dot point form in the script and then wrote under it, add more compelling character stuff in a later draft. And then forgot. So this is everything in the first third of this movie. Alien ship crashes. Bad guy owns ship. Eddie loves Anne and plan to get married. Eddie is a reporter slash blogger and has to interview bad guy. Bad guy killing junkies with aliens. Eddie tries to expose bad guy. Eddie loses job and Anne. Wedding off. 6 months later. Eddie is a bum and Anne says there's no chance of wedding. Lady says Eddie is right. Eddie breaks into bad guy lab and meets Venom. And there we go. The most simple and basic setup to a movie ever. There's no juicy details in any of the opening scenes. Eddie and Anne are introduced, waking up together, both got to start work. They're a happy couple. Later that night at dinner, which was so exciting that they put in the trailers and then they say everything the audience needs to know. We're in love. We're gonna get married soon. Your boss is bad. Your journalism's risky. Don't provoke my boss. But I need the scoops. That night, he reads her emails about the dead test subjects from the lab. And then the very next day is the big interview. Eddie just starts bringing up dead people in the lab and the bad guy shuts down the interview. And then Eddie gets fired. He goes to Anne's apartment and she literally relays what just happened. I said play by the rules. You got me fired. We are over. No wedding. Goodbye. And then you would think this was all fastly written and like rushed so we could get the story going, but somehow all of this just drags on. And a good thing right at the start of your film is they cut to 6 months later where Eddie can't get a job because the bad guy blacklisted him from everything, including dishwasher. Eddie then goes to Anne's apartment. She pulls up in a car with a new boyfriend and she's moved on because women tend to do that. And he starts with the shitty recap. He starts asking if they'll ever get back together and ever get married. Like, my God, you could have a shorter scene of him walking around in public dropping resumes. And he like spots her with a new boyfriend and is like... I should also mention at this point the spaceship that crashed at the start, a symbiote, got away and attached itself to an ambulance driver and was walking its way from Malaysia to America, but that continues throughout the rest of the movie, so it's not just specific to the first act. And so Eddie has this local convenience store that he visits regularly. Mrs. Chan is always there.
No, Mrs. Chan.
And she's always being robbed by this guy. And one of the scenes just starts off with Eddie talking to someone on like the other side of the aisle and how shit they are at hiding or following someone, and he tells them that they suck.
But you suck.
And the someone on the other side of the aisle is this lady scientist who's been working for the bad man. She's fed up with him feeding symbiotes to crack addicts and wants to take the hot scoop to the presses. And Eddie has already dabbled in trying to expose the bad man, So she went back to him. And then she ends up sneaking Eddie into the lab and sending him in alone so he can take photos. He's attacked by some junkie woman that he knew from the convenience store. She transfers his new best friend into his body, and then Eddie and Venom are finally together. Honestly, there was nothing interesting about this build-up. The least effort in the entire screenplay went into the setup, as far as I'm concerned. But then, the brilliance of Tom Hardy and the whole fucking reason of the movie begins. Eddie is walking down the street on the phone to Anne, and he's just like, yeah, so it turns out your boss is bad, and I got proof of it on my phone.
Hungry.
Yeah. Huh? Oh, anyway, I'll call you back. And at this moment, I finally perked up and was like, oh, fuck yeah, here we go. The dynamic of why Tom Hardy took this role begins. The fun of him being sick and like bouncing off of this voice in his head. Even though Tom Hardy's portrayal of Eddie Brock was very goofy to begin with. I guess this is where we just have to get used to a Venom origin without Spider-Man. Eddie can't just be this jerk that gets bested by Peter Parker, and Venom can't get rejected by Spider-Man, forming the dual hatred. This is an Eddie that starts off on his own feet. But anyway, this is the part of the movie where the fun begins. Oh shit. Did I say fun? Oh no. Oh no. Just as soon as the fun starts, it immediately ends. This whole movie becomes rush to the finish. Now the movie from the second act to the end is something that I can't really nitpick in terms of plot. Like Venom has to get away from the evil SWAT team and then blow up the bad man's rocket. Like that's essentially it. While trying to like manipulate Eddie, and then they form like a friendship. So much of this is fun and interesting, but there just isn't enough, making it a very underwhelming final film. Now what I am going to acknowledge is that this is a lower budget movie. Despite a $100 million budget still being a fucking lot, there isn't a lot of the spectacle to put in this like every other superhero movie. And that's not even what I wanted more of. Something I kept thinking about while watching this movie was the classic sci-fi horror film The Fly. That is something that this movie needed more of. Body horror and in-depth science of the symbiote. Christ, we have extended scenes in a laboratory and barely anything is learnt. They shove like crack addicts into this holding cell and the symbiote goes into it and then just kills the junkie and then exits the body. And then the bad guy's like, get me another crack addict. And it's like, shouldn't you be wondering what happened? Like, what are you just going to keep trying again and again? How about the symbiote like bonds with the junkie, but the symbiote is like all weird and has no energy because the host has no nutrients to feed on. So it like adopts the junkie's traits and just sits in the corner as like all weird. And then the bad guy can be like, what's the deal with your species? And it's like mumbling in the corner or something. It's like,
I only answer to Riot.
And he's like, who's Riot? Oh, I guess that's a plot hole. Why didn't the symbiote just bond with the junkie host, go all Venom and just bust out? Then get a better host later. Later on in the film, the bad man finds out that the lady scientist let Eddie into the facility and he leaves her in a cell with like the blue symbiote. But for some reason, the symbiote kills her and then it itself dies. Why didn't it just possess her and be a new symbiote? Also, I'm pretty sure they used the exact same shot of the blue symbiote crawling out of the tube earlier when the bad man talks to the junkie. And that's the other problem. They teased all these other symbiotes in the trailers, like the yellow one and the blue one. But then they just die in the film because they don't have healthy hosts. They should have like possessed people. All of a sudden, Venom name drops Riot. And it's like, what? Who? And he's like,
Riot is in charge of us.
And it's like, what is us? Like, what are you all? An army? An exploring team? Bank robbers? We needed to see the other symbiotes being bossed around by Riot so we can fully understand their impact in the story. But, you know, it was probably too expensive to have 4 fully CGI symbiote characters in this movie, regardless of the $100 million budget. But this is what annoys me. Something that Hollywood never ever does. Why couldn't Venom and Riot just have practical suits and then put the CGI face on top? They even did that in Spider-Man 3. All that CGI work that you don't have to do, and you just match the face textures and lighting to the costume. When the whole thing is CGI, then that's when it really costs the big dollars. So this movie had a massive task of telling Venom's origins without Spider-Man, when this psycho could have just waited for the MCU Infinity Gauntlet Thanos story to wrap up, and all the other superhero movies after that could take a breather. Could have just done it then. Also just want to mention, depending on how Spider-Man makes it back in Avengers 4, he was already in space, already on an alien planet, and could have just gotten the symbiote there. And then you would have homaged the comics perfectly. Because how many times has the Venom origins just been changed to something lands on Earth and makes its way to Peter Parker? Spider-Man 3 was the worst of this, just having a meteorite land. In this movie, along with the Spider-Man animated series from the 90s, they have the space shuttle pick up the symbiotes and then crash land on Earth. And this movie did an okay job of getting around making Venom's origins stand on its own. How do they get around a solo Venom origin movie without Spider-Man? Well, they just took the plot from everyone's favorite Lilo and Stitch. Although briefly mentioned in one fucking sentence in this movie, Venom was an outcast amongst his peers. Venom is aboard a hijacked spaceship that crashes on Earth. Venom is, although not designed, is born to take over planets, is then imprisoned in a holding cell by humans, is then adopted by a human who is also a bit of a loser with no friends and an outcast. Eddie being picked on by other Earthlings, but then is saved by Venom using his skills and out-of-the-box thinking, mixed with some violence and crudity. Eddie and Venom begin working together with an unlikely friendship that's universes apart. Venom begins helping Eddie sort out his issues and reconnecting with his loved one. It's revealed that Venom is still a monster in nature and is still hell-bent on destruction.
Alright, have it your own way. Mask!
Eddie and Venom have a falling out after a conflict. Also in this time, the main villain was hired by a higher-up to kill Venom. Eddie is captured and held hostage. Venom seeks assistance of the human character that Eddie had a falling out with to save him. Venom learns important life lesson and value of friendship, as well as how Earth is a cool place to live and shouldn't be destroyed.
Ohana means family. Family means nobody
gets left behind
or forgotten.
A spaceship explodes. Venom gets to live on Earth in secret. Film ends with them being long lost but found best friends. And there you go. That's how you make a Venom movie without Spider-Man. So yeah, in final conclusion, the movie has some fine fun moments, but overall has a sort of cheapness to the filmmaking. And they think by making it fast-paced will distract you from the shoddy framework, but this is the problem. I want more Tom Hardy Venom. They nailed the performance and the character dynamic even without Spider-Man. By axing him from Venom's origins, it now doesn't even matter if Venom runs across Spidey or not. And you can also see why they axed the R rating of this movie, because aside from that, there's nothing about this movie that's like an R. There's nothing about it that's like violent or disturbing. The second Eddie meets Venom, it becomes like this kid's film. Lilo and Stitch, that's the whole film. This movie even ends with like a kid's movie, where it just cuts to Venom and Eddie walking down the street and they're having like this classic banter. Okay, so if biting heads off people's not on the menu, what do you want to eat?
We want tater tots
Yeah, we can sort that out, my main man.
and chocolate.
I'm just gonna tell you, you have to give me a fair warning if you're ever gonna eat someone's head off again, because I think it's gross.
Why?
Nah, man, it's totally gross.
I like it though.
So what else do you want to do tonight?
The way I see it, we can do whatever we want.
Okay.
Cowabunga, dude.
As for the post-credit scene of this movie, they tease Eddie going to a maximum security prison to interview a serial killer, full Mindhunter style. And who'd you expect? You see a crappy Ronald McDonald wig in the background, and yep, Cletus Cassidy, who was played by Woody Harrelson. And yeah, I'm on board for what I think that sequel will be. Two brilliant actors bouncing off of each other. And if they stick to the comics, then Venom symbiote might reproduce while Eddie's working on the Cletus Cassidy case, and then the Carnage symbiote is born and then runs back to the prison and is like in love with Cletus. I don't know. All I know is that it should have a bigger budget and a better focus than this movie. Also, this fucking witch terrifies me with how shitty her ideas are at expanded universes. She sees dollar signs, she sees a franchise. And yeah, so final score, I give this movie 3.25 out of 6.50. It was only worth half of the price of the ticket I paid for. I can't see myself ever sitting through it again, but I'll probably just rewatch the clips on YouTube. And that's all from me now. And remember, Ohana means family, and family means no one gets left behind.
Like